Go ahead. A ver.
Jorge, ¿me escuchas?
Talk to me, please. Very far.
From the headquarters of Telesur English in Quito, Ecuador, this is From the South. I'm Jose Daniel Lopez. The United Nations General Assembly is debating a resolution to end the U.S. blockade against Cuba. Speaker after speaker has spoken against the economic, financial, and commercial blockade, which has lasted almost 60 years. A series of regional organizations, including CELAC, CARICOM, and ASEAN, also condemned the blockade. They describe it as illegal and affecting millions of people. On behalf of the non-aligned movement, the Venezuelan ambassador UN Samuel Moncada said that support for lifting the blockade is overwhelming.
In the course of the last 27 years, the General Assembly has expressed its support to the people and government of Cuba through its support for the resolution where we call for a lifting of the embargo imposed by the United States of America against this sovereign country. In this respect, the movement would like to take advantage of this opportunity to reiterate its firmest rejection towards the enactment and imposition of unilateral coercive measures, given its effects, extraterritorial effects, as well as its illegal nature. Concerted action to build international mechanisms which would make it possible to counter the effects of the illegal coercive measures against hundreds of millions of people who are innocent victims throughout the world. It is time now to organize and to free our people from this weapon of international aggression which has afflicted humankind.
The Salvadorian ambassador Rubén Escalante, on behalf of the community of Latin American and Caribbean states, CELAC, has said the regional bloc is organizing to fight the blockade and free millions of Cubans from it. The permanent representative of the Caribbean community, CARICOM, Igna Rondon King, has also spoken in the debate.
The Caribbean community reiterates its unequivocal opposition to the United States' imposition of the economic, commercial, and financial embargo against Cuba, which has been in place for nearly 6 decades. The embargo has caused undue hardship on the Cuban people for nearly 2 generations. For almost 30 consecutive years, this General Assembly has opposed, by an overwhelming majority, this unilateral and coercive measure. CARICOM views these sanctions as a contravention of the precepts of international law, including humanitarian law, inconsistent with the policies of free trade, and in conflict with the norms and principles governing peaceful relations among states. In more recent years, this resolution has garnered resounding global support, with all member states voting to end the embargo on Cuba, with the exception of 2. This near-unanimous vote in favor of immediately ending the economic, commercial, and financial embargo against Cuba is a clear indication of prevalent disapproval by the UN membership.
Earlier, the Cuban Foreign Minister Bruno Rodriguez said he believes the 8 amendments presented by the United States to the resolution will be rejected.
Hay una circunstancia nueva este año.
There is a new situation this year, which is a new State Department of the United States that has decided to present amendments against the resolution of the blockade, with the purpose of creating a pretext to harden this blockade against Cuba. This is a policy that has proclaimed and that the statement has the fact are implications to present an illusion about an international support for this policy and also to disrupt, consume time and hinder the resolution adoption.
The Cuban foreign minister also has said the U.S. blockade continues to be a massive violation of Cuban human rights.
The United States already know that it cannot prevent the adoption of forceful resolution with a major unanimity of the General Assembly, with an obsolete policy and anchored with the Cold War according to Geneva against the genocide crime. It is a human right violation of every citizen and internationally who transgresses the trade law and freedom of navigation, which constitutes an aggression act and economic warfare.
We're now joined live from New York by our correspondent Jorge Gestoso, who's following the debate at the UN. Hello, Jorge. What arguments have we heard so far in the debate?
Well, good morning, Jose. We are witnessing the big support of Cuba in this new resolution, the number 27 years in a row where Cuba is presenting a resolution against the blockage of the U.S. to Cuba. Already, the Foreign Minister of Venezuela, Samuel Moncada, was absolutely supporting Cuba in its resolution. Also, all the countries from the Caribbean, the CARICOM group has already expressed their support. We're talking about 2 days session. This is the first one, and throughout the day we are hearing most in the General Assembly here at the New York UN. Most of the countries of the regional groups are going to be having their chance to express their support. What is new is that for the first time in many years, in this case, the U.S. is trying to present 8 amendments to the resolution, and according to the Foreign Minister of Cuba, Bruno Rodriguez, is called a maneuver, an action in order to complicate, to deter, to delay the passage of the resolution. Last year, for example, it was overwhelming support. We're talking about 191 of the 193 countries of the world supporting Cuba, and only the US and Israel were voting against the resolution. And we're talking about that in the last 60 years that the US imposed a blockade, that has created damages in terms of a commercial, financial and economic effect to Cuba of $930 trillion. So in this case, in order, according to the Foreign Minister of Cuba, Rodriguez, this is another interest, another intent of the US through that introduction of those amendments, to trying to create even more tensions among this difficult relation between the two countries. Normally, when amendments are going to be included in a resolution, it's to improve, to make it better. In this case, in order to complicate, to delay, to maneuver, to try to create a negative effect, and trying to get from the US more countries supporting their position, meaning being against the blockade, is trying to create this. We have seen the ambassador of the U.S. To the United Nations, Nikki Haley, arriving already in the building. So that's exactly what we're going to be witnessing today, and tomorrow by the end of the day is going to be the voting. And we are also hearing from the Foreign Minister of Cuba, Bruno Rodriguez. He's very optimistic that that intent to incorporate those 8 amendments in the document, in the resolution, is going not to succeed. It's going to be definitely an intent, and it's not going to be further than that. And once again, the whole world is going to be supporting Cuba. We get back to you now.
Jorge, thank you so much for this information. So let's take a look.
Madam President, Angola considers that the persistence of the unilateral economic, commercial and financial embargo imposed by the United States against Cuba
in 1 year. In fact, the total loss suffered by the island in almost 6 decades is just over $933 billion. In 2017, President Donald Trump Tied the blockade, the new regulations further restricted the right of U.S. citizens to travel to Cuba and impose additional obstacles to opportunities for U.S. business in Cuba. Both Bolivia and Russia have openly condemned the policy renewal. Moscow accused the U.S. of launching an economic war against Cuba. In the last few months, Washington has escalated the hostile rhetoric against the island. On Thursday, the nations of the world will again vote on the Cuban resolution at the UN Assembly. 8 amendments imposed by the U.S. will first be debated. The resolution notes that the blockade continues to be an illegal and morally unjustifiable policy that has only succeeded in subjecting Cubans to shortages and needless suffering by restricting and hindering the country's development and seriously damaging the economy. We'll take a short break now. Don't go away.
Brazilian citizens casted their vote in general elections. To elect their president, Telesur brings you all the developments of the event from the giant of South America. We are connected with you on our website and social networks. Coverage Brazil Decides 2018. Second round vote. Only on Telesur, the news source of Latin America and the Caribbean.
Welcome back. On Wednesday, hundreds of migrants from Honduras arrived at a shelter in Guatemala. The group arrived at a shelter held by a Catholic organization in Guatemala City. They intended to rest during their trip heading to the United States. Another similar group of Honduran migrants are already in East Guatemala. The various migrant caravans traveling to the U.S.-Mexico border continue to persevere despite the hardships. The group that crossed from Guatemala into Mexico on Monday is now close to reaching the town of Tapachula. Thousands of migrants from Honduras, Guatemala, and El Salvador have decided to start their journey fleeing poverty and violence, all while the United States threaten them with action. The other migrant group is already in Mexico. Our correspondent Pablo Perez from Chiapas tells us about the last news on the migrant caravan.
It's been only 2 days since they first set foot on Mexican soil, and they are showing the signs of exhaustion because after the difficult river crossing on the border, they have only walked 30 miles so far. There's only around 18 miles to go to the first stop today in Huixtla, still in the state of Chiapas, and they have high hopes, really high hopes of reaching the first group of the migrant caravan, but they are 250 miles away still. So it's difficult because physically they're running on fumes, and they still have long stretches of road without any possibility of getting help from the villagers around, because there's still even one stretch that has about 60 or 70 miles without any population at all, which is the way they get their water and food. So they have to wait, and they have to deliberate what is the best choice to take in order to reach the first caravan.
In Brazil, social movements and different parties have united to build a resistance front against President-elect Jair Bolsonaro. They say he represents a setback to human rights and a threat for minorities.
Social and left-leaning movements in Brazil are creating a broad front of resistance for democracy to resist against the incoming government of Jair Bolsonaro. The protest and march, organized by social movements around the country, confirmed the willingness to reject the hate speech against minorities promoted by the elected president.
Bolsonaro has to follow the Brazilian constitution and respect people's rights. Indigenous people will never be intimidated by the militarism nor by the authoritarianism that he is promoting.
Representatives of environmental organizations, defenders of national sovereignty, and organizations against the criminalization of groups such as Landless Workers Movement said they are concerned about the life of former President Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva. They said they are also afraid about their own lives after the violent acts by Bolsonaro's supporter during the electoral campaign.
I have always been very scared. Now the fear is even greater because of the speech of Bolsonaro. Now it is necessary that other voices unite to confront him because he is going to be in office for 4 years and we have to keep fighting.
People can resist. My black people has been already resisting for a long time, more than 400 years of slavery, close to 120 years after slavery abolition. People kept resisting in the favelas, outside the cities. People know how to resist, so they have to resist again. They have to protect themselves, but they know now that the resistance means democracy.
The Brazilian former presidential candidate Fernando Haddad will be the leader of that resistance front and protection network. Their goal is to guarantee the rights of those communities threatened by Bolsonaro.
And the president-elect has started rolling out key points of his hardline agenda. The top economic advisor for Bolsonaro, Paulo Guedes, has told reporters that the president-elect will take up fiscal reforms as part of his agenda. Guedes also confirmed a decision to create an economic super-ministry combining finance, planning, industry and trade. Bolsonaro's first trips as president will be to Chile, Israel and the United States, countries his team says share our world views. The family of Honduran leader and environmental activist Berta Cáceres has denounced a lack of transparency in the investigation of her murder. In a press conference, relatives of the indigenous defender say the court has denied to accept their evidence against the men accused. Relatives also say that despite this, they hope the intellectual authors of the crime and the hitmen will be punished. Berta Cáceres was killed in 2016.
We demand the Honduran state to guarantee all the efforts to accept all evidence from this investigation, to prevent this murder goes unpunished. We also demand the court to prevent the accused to be set free.
The preventative detention against the accused is coming to an end. There's no possibility of keeping them in jail, so who's going to guarantee that they don't leave the country or even get killed for having key information on the intellectual perpetrators?
Women across Colombia have arrived in the capital of Bogota to analyze a follow-up report on the implementation of the peace agreement. They condemn the government for the lack of commitment to protect social leaders.
Women from the regions that have historically been affected by the armed conflict arrived in Bogota to see how far the peace process has come. They are deeply disappointed that social leaders continue to be murdered.
Most of the murders of leaders happens in conflict-ridden areas. The violence from dissidents and armed groups is linked to drug trafficking.
Maria Arrizabalaeta, one of the 2 survivors of the struggle for women's vote in Colombia, says that women have been victims of war and advocate for peace.
This peace process has served everybody because it takes a little bit of the load of the war. The war is horrible. We don't give birth to our children to be murdered. So the fact that the murders have decreased gives us a lot of joy. But there is still a long way to go.
The peace agreement gave hope to put an end to the armed conflict and to compensate the victims. But the reality is very different.
They are suffering, especially because of the non-compliance from the state. Some officials lack the will to do anything.
This attitude prevails, and the government does nothing to end inequality.
These alerts have to do with gender equality. They also have to do with the closure of the gaps that we have, the inequalities that we have here in Colombia. It has to do with the employability of women, and it also has to do with the issue of justice and strengthening of peace institutions.
Women have called on the government to advance the implementation of the peace agreement and to guarantee the life of those who tirelessly work for peace and equality.
Panama is issuing new tourism cards to allow Cuban citizens with ties to private businesses to enter the country visa-free for a month-long stay. The new measure shows growing commercial ties between the two countries. Cuba is looking for more international investments and credit from friendly countries, as aid from Venezuela has decreased due to sanctions imposed by the U.S. and the European Union.
This step that we've taken, I believe that will strengthen the economic opening that you're seeing in Cuba. And following the country's rules and respecting the country's regulations and all their systems, it will make visits to Panama easier, because many Cubans are traveling. They travel to other countries, they return to their country, and they're setting up their own businesses. They're moving forward. And this facilitates this process.
Salvadorian President Salvador Sanchez Cerén has arrived in China for an official visit. This is the first time that a Salvadorian head of state visits China. Sanchez Cerén met Chinese Vice Minister of Foreign Affairs, King Wang, to strain diplomatic ties between the two countries. In August, El Salvador broke ties with Taiwan to begin relations with China. We'll take a short break now. More news in a minute.
With developing events being presented through analysis, our coverage transcends borders. With renowned journalist Walter Martinez.
Salud amigos, tripulantes de nuestra querida, contaminada y única nave espacial.
Dossier. Weekdays. Only on Telesur.
Y ponga usted las cámaras, señor director.
Welcome back. For the first time, Turkey has given details on the way the Saudi journalist Jamal Khashoggi died. According to the Turkish prosecutor's office, Khashoggi was suffocated as soon as he entered the Saudi consulate on the 2nd of October. The statement also said it was a pre-planned killing, and his body was dismembered and disposed. It added that no concrete results were reached this week with Saudi public prosecutors' visit to Turkey. One person has died and 3 others injured in an explosion at the Federal Security Services headquarters in Russia. Russia's investigative committee said a 17-year-old teenager blew himself up in the lobby of the office, detonated a homemade bomb. The committee said the teenager was a resident of the city where the headquarters are. The causes of the incident are being investigated. The U.S. Secretary of Defense, James Mattis, has called for the Saudi-led coalition to stop the bombing of Yemen. Mattis said the attacks have to cease in the next 30 days, and that war has been going on for long enough in that region. This call comes in criticism of the U.S. support for the Saudi-led coalition in the conflict.
All right now is to achieve a level of capability by those forces fighting against the Houthis that they are not killing innocent people. the longer-term solution, and by longer term, I mean 30 days from now, we want to see everybody around a peace table based on a ceasefire, based on a pullback from the border, and then based on ceasing dropping of bombs that will permit the special envoy, Martin Griffiths, who's very good, he knows what he's doing, to get them together in Sweden and end this war. That is the only way we're going to really solve this.
In a landmark ruling, Pakistan's Supreme Court has acquitted a woman who was been on death row for 8 years on a blasphemy charge. Aisha Bibi won her appeal against the conviction, and her death sentence was subsequently overturned. Back in 2010, she was found guilty of taking the Prophet Muhammad's name in vain while arguing with neighbors. Security has been intensified in Islamabad, aimed at concerns that ruling could spark protests. India has unveiled the world's tallest statue in the western state of Gujarat. At 182 meters, it has twice the height of the Statue of Liberty. The bronze statue has been made in honor of one of India's biggest freedom fighters, Sardar Vallabh Patel. Today marks his 75th birth anniversary. And we come to the end of this news brief. These and many other stories you can find at our website at telesurtv.net/English. And for our viewers in Africa, remember you can find us on StarSat channel 461 in South Africa and channel 539 in Nigeria. And join us on social media, Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. For Telesur English, I'm Jose Daniel Lopez. Thank you for watching.